Hey, it's Joe West from the West Barn with
Mike Shimshack.
Today we have Karl Braun on. He is a managing partner of the Nashville office of Hall Booth Smith. He is specializes in entertainment litigation. He also does a ton of litigation, which is very rare in the law world. You have to actually find a lawyer that enters a courtroom and argues. He's called me several times saying, "Yeah, I got to go. I'm about to get in front of a grand jury." So. He's just one of the most talented guys, and in it for the right reasons. He's a true lover of music. He's a songwriter. He's a musician. He has been all around the music scene. He has a very talented daughter, Dylan Taylor, that is just fantastic. And he is a friend to all songwriters, record producers. So a really trusted dude. I love him a lot. He's been my lawyer unofficially probably for the past 20 years. He also is a bit of a freak. Like if you're into the Jocko Willink's model where you see him showing his watch every morning at, what is that, like 4:30, he'll show like, hey, I'm getting up and doing push-ups. Karl's up a good hour and a half before that. I'm looking here at a picture that is a pull-up bar, and it says his 2020 fitness journey. He jogged or power hiked 3,015 miles. He climbed 666,705 stairs. He did 50,400 push-ups. That is 50,399 more push-ups than I did during 2020. He did over 18,000 pull-ups, 36,790 free weight curls, 1,365 ab carver wheel, whatever that is. I mean, you've got to be so deep into it at that point that you would know what that is. And he cycled over 718 miles. Which is an incredible feat. And like I said, if you watch him, you need to subscribe to him on Instagram and Facebook.
I'm trying to get to 2,000. I can't get to 2,000.
But you got to see him because he's out of his mind. It's 3:00 in the morning. He's somewhere in Nashville, and he is pumped to be alive and exercising like a crazy person at 3 a.m. And then I asked him this morning, I said, do you go back to bed after that? He's like, no, I'm up. I'm up for the week or for the day. He catches up on his sleep on the weekend. So we are proud to have him. Thank you, Karl, for being on. All that in spite of a major injury that he had, where he had a major spinal operation where his entire spine is fused together. And this is what he does the year after. So he's a spectacular person. Welcome to the show, Karl.
That's a very gracious introduction, Joe. And I want to say, too, that the subject matter that we're going to be talking about today, you may know as much or more than I do about it. You've stayed so on top of everything. And, our conversations have always impressed me because of how on top of the contractual and the legal aspects of the business you stay and still do all your creative and keep a good supply of cigars in the studio, too. I mean, all of that.
You raise a really good point. You raise a really good point. I was just talking with an artist that I had in the day before yesterday for a vocal session from Texas. And we were talking on the porch, having a cigar in between vocal takes. And I told him, we no longer have the luxury of being Billy Joel, where our manager is buying a whole fleet of Clydesdale horses, with him woefully unaware. We have to be in charge of our finances. We have to know what a controlled composition clause, the results of that. Is it worth me producing the record with a controlled composition clause? These are the kind of things we're going to talk about today, but it is our duty as people to make sure that we understand the agreements we're getting in, because the very first time it goes right and a lot of money's collected, you will learn where you made your mistakes, and you will try not to repeat them. So, and also, can you give me the legal disclaimer for today's thing? Because I'm sure I won't get it right. This is not legal advice, right?
Right. And I don't have my own radio show or anything, so I don't do it regularly. So I'm going to just ad lib. But basically, I'm not giving out legal advice. No one should rely on what I say to make legal decisions. If they want to engage my services and develop an attorney-client relationship, then they can get in touch with me separately, and we can enter into an engagement, and then I can offer legal advice to them. And anything in the music industry that I say today could be different tomorrow, as you know. Yeah. As a matter of fact, you gave my older daughter a great great plug. I sincerely appreciate that. My younger daughter, Madison, who's in the film industry, who's a set designer, she sent me a link to a Rolling Stone article this morning, just before we started this. And I wanted to ask you if you were familiar with this non-fungible token concept. I figured y'all probably were.
I sent it to Mike last night.
Yeah. So Madison sent me that. So I'm giving her a shout out because I know she's listening. But I thought it was really interesting how cryptocurrency is now, entering into the music industry and giving artists, a new way to monetize. And one of the things it said in the article that I found interesting was that the industry has found every way for music to make money for everything else except music. Right. Every music sells everything except music.
Yeah, as the great Jerry Goldenson says, try to live a day without hearing music or having it as a crucial part of your day.
Right. And that's one of the things David Ross, who was David Ross, who was the former head of Music Row, who owned Music Row, did a book about music being a public good and having public funding for music like you do cable, television. Yeah. Back when ESPN first started, cable charged all their subscribers a very small amount of money on their cable bill to sustain ESPN so that they could have a sports network. Well, that never went away. Now ESPN is huge, but we're still paying a small amount to access the internet, to access cable TV. Why not do something like that for music and then decide where that income goes in terms of all the different organizations and, so.
Yeah, that's incredible. How familiar are you with this token? Did you get much out of it? From what I read, it was that the Kings of Leon, I think, are doing a release, and it's going to be available via this blockchain traceable. You can own the content, and they have used this token. I forget what they called it. It's a non-fungible token, but there's an actual name for it. There's two that they were talking about, but you can actually buy pieces of art, like a digital piece of art that you'd pay $1 million for, and it would be secure, that transaction, that you would have ownership of it, and it couldn't be reproduced.
Right. And it's because it's going through the blockchain.
It almost seems like everything we've been searching for in the music business for the past 20 years. Right?
Or and I'm looking at it now.
Since Napster.
You got to go through this Yellow Heart company to buy the token, which is priced at $50, it says, and it includes enhanced media. You can get a moving album cover. You can get a digital download of the music in limited edition vinyl. They go on sale Friday and they continue for 2 weeks. And after that time, no more will be made. So it becomes a tradable collectible. You can get front row seats for life to their shows. You can get, all sorts of different things from the.
It almost requires people that, just like we moved away from cassettes to CD, and we moved away from CD to MP3, and then MP3 to streaming of MP3s. It almost requires people to abandon the streaming model, because why would you pay $50 for something you can stream for free, right? I mean, it would almost say, like, if Kings of Leon would have to, in order to make this a success, say we're not going to have this record available anywhere other than here.
Right. And also I think the concept too is developing the super fans, where you can get that recurrent income. But but you're right. Although I don't think you could completely take it off of all the streaming platforms, because you would need to have a certain amount of promotion and marketing. I don't know how you could limit that though.
Sounds like it's a brilliant way to do the ancillary stuff, like you said, the record covers and the front row seats, and it's the exclusivity of this, I think, that's cool. But I would be surprised if they didn't have it on streaming services. But.
Right.
Yeah, and if it is on streaming services, that's like putting apples outside in the free take one pile and then charging $10 for them inside the store. Like, who in the right mind would go in and pay the $50?
What you're paying for is the custom Apple T-shirts and everything else that comes with it, and the beautiful hand-drawn pictures of apples. That's really
I think that's a great point. I used to love looking at records and albums and just studying the center of the record, what was written in the vinyl, or who mastered it, or just in tool. I learned so much about Dan Huff from being a guitar player on so many records, and I would be, oh, Dan Huff again. And good luck finding out, because you go to my All Music page, it'll say that I played a bass on something that I didn't play bass on, or I sang this vocal on something, it's not accurate. I really do think there's a market there. I'm really excited about this non-fungible token idea, because I think it's a real way to pull the music business out of the toilet. Because right now, it's nobody gives a hoot that there's all this intellectual property being stolen. It's just the society as a whole doesn't care. So we haven't enforced it. So this is I'm really interested. I'm going to follow this. I sent it out to Mike last night. I'm surprised. I'm surprised that you heard about it so soon too. I mean, it's just it's one of those things that's like, okay, this could be something. This is hopeful.
Like I said, I was fortunate that and I'm looking again that my daughter sent it to me. But yeah, I try to keep up with that. I get the Billboard bulletin every day. And of course I study all the Music Row emails that come out every day, and I try to stay on top of things, but it's impossible. Like I said, what we might say today, could be irrelevant by tomorrow, just right. Non-fungible token.
But there are things that, like, when I call you for questions or throw a contract your way, there's always, if it gets to the point that I know about it and I'm not a lawyer, those are the things we wanted to cover today. Like the things that are the low-hanging, meaningful fruit for everybody in their contracts. And we want to talk about producer and engineer situations where you're working with clients. And of course, we'll be talking about, like, maybe from the position of a producer, but it also talks about the position of the artist or record label negotiating with that producer. And we also want to talk about artists and publishing. So we're going to start off with engineers and producers, and some of the things that you're going to see that are actually meaningful long-term in a contract, the things that keep coming up, the things that are the important parts of having production deals and or having yourself protected, participating in a record. So right. What do you think some of those things are? Let's talk like an engineer and or producer and or mix engineer that's like, hey, I want you to work on this record and this is the contract I want you to sign. What are the things that they need to, the big high points, the rights of refusal, most favored nations, the points on the back end? What are the things that you think are the ones we need to be paying attention to?
And, my experience has evolved from primarily representing artists in deals with producers and production companies to now doing more deals from the producer side and the production side. So I've kind of seen it now from both sides. And there are several categories of producers, as you know. I mean, there are producers that are also songwriters like yourself, and there are producers that are not songwriters, and that enters into the production agreement, because when a lot of times now, and I represent a couple of producers, one in particular who's got a song about to go into the top 10 right now as a songwriter, but she's also a producer. And so one of the things we always have to look at, since you mentioned the control composition clause, is we have to look at the publishing at the same time that we look at the production points. So when I do agreements for her, the first thing I have to ask is, are you a co-writer on any of these or not? Because that significantly changes and actually lengthens the contract.
Tell us what a controlled composition clause is.
That's a composition. That's a clause that developed through back in the old days of the hitmen with, CBS and Walter Yitnikoff and all those guys. What they did was they wanted to have publishing at the same time as have the rights to the sound recording and the artist and everything else. And so what they would do is they would include publishing in these deals. And one of the things that they did to control costs was, which is kind of counterintuitive, they would say to the artist, if you write a song, meaning you control it partly or all the way, then we're gonna pay you less for that. And we're gonna limit it on top of paying you less for that than what is statutorily required, because the statutory mechanical license is a certain amount. Right now it's 9.1 cents. What we're going to do is we're going to only pay you 75% of that rate on any compositions you control. And then we're going to limit how many of those you can put on the record. Usually it's 10. And if you go above that number, then you're responsible for the difference between the 75% of the rate and the full rate. So it becomes more expensive for the artist to put their own songs on the record.
Same thing happens with a producer. If you're a producer that wrote the song, and when you're working with a record label and they want to put your song on the record that you're producing, they're going to say, hey, thank you so much for this hit song. We're so grateful that we're going to pay you 75 pennies instead of 100 for this song.
And I'm looking at one of my agreements right now so that I have a controlled composition portion. And in that controlled composition portion, I specifically say, and hopefully can get the other side to agree to this, that if the artist is going to agree to a controlled composition clause, that the producer has to be consulted. Now, the reality is, if the artist is about to get a big record deal, the producer is probably not going to nix it by saying, I insist on the full mechanical rate, then the record company will just say, okay, well, we just won't use your songs. We won't put your songs on the record. And the producer doesn't want that. So it's kind of a too bad situation ransom thing. We're going to hold this thing hostage until you agree to this. But we try to keep it, we try to keep from agreeing to that. And I put in that anything written or controlled by the producer shall be licensed to the artist for the full rate.
Right. So, and I guess maybe these topics can be considered, like we just talked about that from an artist songwriter standpoint and a producer. So maybe we could just talk about some of the big topics and then distill them through different, like how it would work for a producer, or it does work the same way. Because
I was going to say too, the mechanical royalty rate is archaic. I mean, it goes back to the early 1900s. It's based on sheet music that, related to the piano rolls.
So let's break this down. Mechanicals happen anytime a physical product is sold, right?
Or a permanent download. Right.
Right. So
anytime you own it, anytime you own the music, you purchase the music and you
have
own
physical possession of it, would you say?
Or a permanent download that becomes yours to keep, as opposed to streaming it only rent. I call it renting versus owning. I mean, when you have a subscription to Spotify and you just stream, you're basically renting the asset. You don't own it. So the mechanical applies to that. You're right. CDs back in the day, albums, and it's only 9.1 cents per song, which is bizarre because it's also statutory. So artists and record companies can deal on the open market and get free market kind of negotiations going to get what the fair value is. But songwriters are subject to all this metric of statutory provisions that results in songwriters getting about 12.5% of every dollar.
Yeah, but why do you think that is? They're just underrepresented by special interest, or?
Well, and the broadcasters have had typically huge control, and that's why we still don't have the sound recording artist royalty on terrestrial radio still, because of the broadcasters insisting that back in the day, it made sense. Even Frank Sinatra was saying, hey, the songwriter's making all this money when my song's played on the radio and I'm not getting anything, and it's my voice. Well, the broadcasters kind of rightfully said, well, you wouldn't be Frank Sinatra if we didn't put you on the radio, because back then terrestrial radio was all there was.
So let's stop here real quick and let's talk a little bit, because this can be so confusing. Money's made so many ways in the music business, but we're talking about a couple things here. We're talking about mechanicals. Mechanicals, if anytime you hear somebody talk about a mechanical royalty, just assume that something's, you have ownership of something. You've bought something. You went and purchased a thing that lives permanently with you. It's an asset that you now have in your possession to use for yourself. When they talk about other royalties, like the master royalty, meaning like when they go play a song at radio, the copyright earns money from terrestrial radio, but the people who own the recording, Every recording has two things associated with it. It has a song, which some people maybe the guy who recorded it wrote it, but it might be these strangers that wrote it. And then you have the recording of that song. And that's why, there's songs back in the 50s and 60s that recorded by 100 people. It was like Sammy Davis Jr. did a version, Elvis did a version. So those songwriters got paid. And then there was this recording that was like a different embodiment of that copyright. It was a physical master of it. So the only way that physical master makes money is when they sell it in a store and it gets a mechanical. That's a physical sale. That's how record companies used to make their money. The songwriters make their money. They get a mechanical royalty of 9.1 cents per song. So on a record of 10 songs, it's the 91 cents per record sold goes to all the myriad of songwriters and publishers that have songs on that embodied recording. So they get a mechanical. Songwriters also get a performance royalty. BMI, ASCAP, CSAC, SOCAN, all these companies around the world that collect for performance royalty. So whenever your song is played on a jukebox in Panama City, Florida, or it's played through the PA speaker at a conference, or it's played on the radio to the city of Dallas, those are performance royalties. And when it gets put on TV and synced to an image and it's played on television, those generate by their performance, the actual performance. Take away the person playing it on the record. It would be as if you showed up to play a gig and that music came out of the speakers. It has to enter into the air and be heard. Those are performance royalties. Songwriters get performance royalties. They get mechanicals, they get performance royalties. Mechanicals are hard product being sold, a little sliver of that spot that the record company also gets, and they also get performance royalties. So when it's played on the radio, for instance, some big hit songs earn over $1 million at terrestrial radio in the first year if they're a big hit. So that will go to the songwriter. But the record label who paid for all that radio promotion and to put it out there on the radio station, maybe up to $1 million worth of pushing radio promotion to get that song up the charts, have now paid $1 million. The songwriters collectively have earned $1 million off performance royalties. And the record label who owns the recording of that, in essence, is advertisement. They don't get any money for the master actually being exploited and played. Their reward comes when you say, I love that song, and go out and buy the record. So that's just, I know that this when I was a younger kid, I looked at this stuff and it was like, yeah, but this one goes to 11, or who's on first. My brain immediately, I don't know if I did a good job explaining that, but that's essentially some of these terms we're going to be talking about today. And when we get into these composition clauses and most favored nations and all these things we're going to be talking about, it all comes down to money. And this is how the money is kind of made in our business. Am I missing anything else in that little schematic of 90% of the income of what we're dealing with?
No, I think you got it exactly right. And I would add that the other creative contributors that don't get paid when it's played on terrestrial radio are all the studio musicians and everybody associated with that sound recording. And we are I think we're one of just a handful of countries in the whole world that don't pay a sound recording royalty for terrestrial radio airplay. And there's what I understand, hyperbolically, is a huge black box in Europe where they're holding royalties, sound recording royalties for terrestrial airplay, because we don't reciprocate. If we're not going to pay for the sound recording on terrestrial radio here in the United States, they're not going to pay us for the terrestrial radio play in Europe. Right. But almost every other country, and I think, there's some examples of countries that don't pay it. It's like Iran and China, right. We're in this group of countries that's just a bizarre group of countries that have still refused to pay that sound recording.
But what is Sound Exchange then? What is the money that these session musicians are getting? Where's that derived from? Sound
Exchange is for non-interactive. Now we're entering into the difference in two different types of streaming. And also, Congress decided we're going to create a new right for the copyright holder. And that is going to be a sound recording copyright right, but it's only in digital audio, not analog, not what goes on terrestrial. Gotcha. Only what streams. That has the sound recording and the artist and the musicians payment for digital. And that's what Sound Exchange is. Now, Sound Exchange, though, only pays on non-interactive. And the difference between non-interactive and interactive is basically the difference between terrestrial radio and, say, Pandora. Terrestrial radio, you can't pick what you're going to listen to. They have their list of songs. They're going to play them regardless of what you want. I remember back in the day, if I loved a song, I could call and try to request it, but I had to sit there and wait for it. And if I wanted to try to record it, I had to try to record it on my cassette player, like in my car or something. And you get the beginning where they go, here's the new hit from, you have all that. So you couldn't really get you had to go buy it. That was the whole thing. You had to buy music. But the non-interactive is Pandora. Even though they're semi-interactive, they do things to try to keep it from being interactive. They stay non-interactive, but they give you a certain amount of control as much as they can without crossing that line. What the biggest revenue, and this is important in production agreements, the biggest revenue that comes from Sound Exchange is Sirius XM. It's satellite radio, as opposed to
playlists and internet.
Pandora is not going to bring you any more money conceivably than, say, Spotify, although Spotify is the lowest paying service out there. But terrestrial pays nothing, and satellite Sirius pays through Sound Exchange. And so what I always do in production agreements for the producer is I make sure that the percentage that they get for their Sound Exchange producer royalties is roughly the equivalent of the points they get on the record. So for easy math, let's say the artist signs an agreement, has a 16% artist royalty with the record label. That's an all-in royalty that includes the producer royalty, as you know, Joe. Let's say the producer royalty is 4% of that 16 because you're a big-time producer. So 4% of 16% is 25%, right? So what I then do is say, okay, if this is a big time producer, they're getting 4 points. That's usually the highest percentage, maybe 5. Dan Huff could probably get 6, but that 4% now needs to translate into that producer also getting that amount from Sound Exchange. So I make sure the artist in the signing process signs a letter of direction to Sound Exchange, specifically identifying the producer getting 25% and an attached list of titles on which the producer is getting a percentage. Now, 25% is high. That's going to be for your top line, producers. 20% is more common. 20% is what is your next level below, like Dan Huff or someone like that.
Let me clear one thing up. I have a question. So you're saying Sound Exchange only is if somebody's choosing what they're listening to online, no Sound Exchange.
Right.
Only for like what would be like a playlist that is uncontrollable, where the user can't control. Those guys get royalties. So producers, maybe, and I don't know about engineers, but
it's only the sound recording. Only the sound recording. That's the digital sound recording payment that has no equivalent over on the terrestrial side.
And we don't do that. And that's when we went back to our old analogy there, that the record companies are paying $1 million to get played on the radio to hopefully sell records, but they aren't going to make that money back. They don't get any money from radio. But the master does earn in that situation in digital whenever it's not controlled by the user, the decision.
Right.
This is why we're going crazy, Karl. This is like, this level of intricacy is it just feels like someone's got you in an MMA armbar. As a creator, you tap out. You say, I'm done. I'm done.
When you go to, and the interesting thing about Sound Exchange, and what every artist needs to know, any artist who's releasing product through any kind of a distributor, TuneCore, CD Baby, Merlin, any size, needs to register with Sound Exchange. Sound Exchange has a booth at South by Southwest where they put up a list of artists playing at South by Southwest, and they say, if you see this artist, tell them to come see us because we have money. because
Brilliant.
so many people don't understand, like you're saying, there's so much going on. How do I register here? I register there. Just Dylan Taylor is hard to keep up with. You got to register the copyright within 3 months of when she puts it out and publishes it. You got to register with Sound Exchange and keep that list up to date. You got to register with she's with CSAC. You got to make sure you're right. But what they do at South by Southwest is say, look, we got this money, because if you're an artist, your stuff's getting played if you're releasing it. Your stuff is out there. And you as an artist, a player, not the songwriter, you as an artist on that sound recording, or a player on the sound recording, or the owner of the sound recording, and you have to register both on Sound Exchange. You have to register as the artist and the owner of the sound recording. If you're both the record label and the artist, it's all about the sound recording.
Got it. And
the performance, to just go back to what you were saying about the performance royalty that's paid through ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC.
Yeah, here in the States.
The interesting thing about that, it's like SOCAN in Canada, and they've got a bunch of different ones in Europe. But the interesting thing about that public performance right is, in order for a songwriter to get that paid, and right now you have to get it paid through CSAC, ASCAP, BMI, and Global Rights, Irving Azoff's company. But you have to go through one of those companies as a writer. You have to affiliate with one of those companies. Well, the trade-off for that is your song is included in their repertoire. So if you go to a convention center and you hear your song, and you're let's say you're walking through the convention center in February, and the Conservative Political Action Committee is there. And I represented Newt Gingrich back in 2012, oddly enough. I mean, copyright has no politics. But I got that gig just because one of my partners in Atlanta was his chief of staff, and he got sued over use of Eye of the Tiger. You might remember that. I don't know.
I do remember.
But what caught Frankie Sullivan's attention was CPAC. Newt Gingrich took the stage at CPAC to Eye of the Tiger, and Frankie Sullivan went ballistic because he didn't want anybody to think that he was endorsing Newt Gingrich. The Newt Gingrich people, they didn't know anything about music. All they know is that the convention center handed them a PRO list. It said, here's a list of all the songs that you can pick from, that we can give you the license for. And they're like, Eye of the Tiger. Well, they heard it. They saw oh man, this is huge. When he takes stage to that, he becomes bigger than life. This is my imagination of what was going on behind the scenes. But so, unfortunately, they started doing it other than in like places that are covered by PRO licenses. And so that's where they got a little bit in trouble, because you can't just play a song. But you hear about this all the time, like with Trump. You hear about Springsteen, you hear about Jagger, you hear about, hey, I don't want you using my song. And it's too bad. I mean, if you're affiliated with BMI, SCAP, or whatever, and it's a public performance, you're SOL. I mean, if you say, okay, I'm not going to affiliate anymore, then say goodbye to your terrestrial royalties.
I'm writing down admin rights, because that's what that really, like, do you really think Ray LaMontagne wanted his song in a dog food commercial? You know what I'm saying? Right? At some point, he made the phone call and he's like, what is going on? Get my song out of it. And they're like, sorry, you don't have, I know you think it's your song, but you don't. This whole Taylor Swift garbage where she's mad that they're not selling her back her masters, that, there's this conversation where it's like you enter into these agreements knowing and signing these logistics. You have to be able to stand by them. We're adults here. I want to talk really quickly about work for hire. Yeah. Versus all the stuff we're talking about is back end royalty stuff, which is like, hey, you write a song and then hopefully someone records it, goes on the radio, makes this money, and you collect it over the next 20 years, right? Mailbox money. You produce a record and that goes out and it's a hit, and you get your 3 points, your 4 points, and you get the mailbox money after recoupment. You do this, all this stuff is back end work, which is great when it works, and it very rarely works. But most of these musicians that we're talking about, and engineers and producers, are usually work for hire agreements, which means as a plumber comes to your house, once he works on your toilet, it's not his intellectual property. he doesn't get a royalty every time you flush. Right? This is not.
That'd be good. That'd be good if you could get that.
It depends, especially with our diet in America, a lot of flushing going on. But I'm wondering, it's like, okay, you have to say to yourself, and I like work for hire. You know why? Because it's like, I know my day. I know that I can book my life, which is like, if you want Mike Shimshack in the room to produce your record, you got to give him $1,500 to produce the song, or $2,000 to produce a song, and then $1,500 to mix it, or whatever. That's something that's like, sometimes you will have that plus an obligation of points in the back end.
Right.
But there's something beautiful. You hire a drummer. He comes in, he plays the track, he leaves. You hire a guitar player, he puts a beautiful melody on top of your thing, but it's work for hire. You now own that. He will never see a penny unless it's associated with a master getting a royalty later. You don't owe him anything as a letter of direction. And a letter of direction, because Karl mentioned it, is where once you agree to this stuff, the lawyer sends a letter of direction to whoever is administering this money so that you don't have to wait for Kenny Chesney to hand you $1. When the money comes in from everywhere, it gets divvied up through these letters of direction. So, but let's tell me a little bit about, work for hire is really the law of the land. I mean, it's really how most of us are working. How many people are writing up contracts to mix a record for some regional artist, right? So there's no responsibility to that creator, that engineer, that producer. You can buy songs, work for hire as well, right?
Yes. And what I would say from your perspective as the producer, the interesting thing when I'm representing artists who are going to go in and record a record with you as the producer, I tell the artist, you have to be responsible for getting the work for hire signed by the producer. Mm-hmm. If you as the producer don't sign that work for hire, you own that sound recording. The producer owns it. Until such time as the producer releases their right in the sound
now,
recording.
even if they pay for the studio time, let's say you go into Ocean Way.
Yeah. Now,
wow, I didn't know that, Karl.
Because work for hire is in the U.S. Copyright Act. So in order to transfer copyright ownership under the U.S. Copyright Act, you have to have a writing signed by the copyright owner. So many people come to me and say, and this is especially true in the hip hop world. And I've got a couple of clients in Atlanta, and they're saying to me, well, I paid for that. I paid for the sessions. Just like you said, I said, yeah, but did you get anything signed by the producer that has signed the copyright in the sound recording and stated it was a work for hire? Well, no, I thought for sure that it was. And you can try to make the argument that you paid for it, but the problem is it's a U.S. statute. It's a federal statutory requirement. So if the producer is going to be, and it's like kind of bottom of the barrel to do it sometimes. I mean, if you just got paid a whole bunch of money to produce something and you give them the Pro Tools files and everything, and they walk away with everything thinking, okay, I've got it. And then it goes huge. And then the producer says, you didn't get a work for hire from me. I own that sound record. That's a little bit shady.
Now, is it the producer the only one that owns it? Does the engineer own it? Do the guitar player and bass player own it?
Typically, it's the producer because the producer is typically in control of everything. I mean, but now if you're, engineer and producer kind of cross over, I mean, so that's another reason you need the work for hire, so that there isn't a session player out there that says, and this is where this can come in. The session player plays a signature lick,
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And makes that song. Barry Richmond played that signature. And Barry Richmond, I just bring him up. He's in Atlanta. I took guitar lessons from him back in the 90s. But he wrote that signature lick on the Bertie Higgins hit. Da 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 da. The big Bertie Higgins hit. Here's looking at you, kid.
Oh yeah, yeah.
All the thing. Well, Barry Richmond played that guitar riff. That's at the mid. Da da da
da.
Or
how about Baker Street or all those sax big intros that are bigger hooks than some of the hooks in those songs.
Right. If technically, if nobody has a work for hire and that sound recording is just floating out there, everybody who participated on it arguably has a right in that sound recording.
And when you talk about the copyright, you're talking about not the copyright of the song. You're talking about the copyright of the recording.
There's a sound, like you talked about earlier, there's a sound recording copyright and a composition copyright. Right. And the song I use, and that's because of my age, I guess, is the Rodgers and Hammerstein, My Favorite Things from The Sound of Music. That's been covered in every different genre. You got a Coltrane version, you got a rock version, you got classical.
Great example.
Pop, and so I'm sorry, what, Mike?
Ariana Grande did the reinterpretation of that. Have you seen that?
I haven't, but I can imagine. So I'm going to look for it now. That's a good example.
Yeah, they changed the lyrics. It's kind of a really interesting thing people are doing is taking these old songs like that, that everybody knows, it's in our subconscious, and they're changing the lyric. But Rodgers and Hammerstein is still the writers. Cool.
Right, and they still have to go if they're going to create. And what you just described as a derivative work, what they've done is they've taken the original composition and created a derivative. They had to get a license from the Rodgers and Hammerstein estate or whoever's admitted.
They could have refused that, right? That's considered a first use license.
Right. Yeah. And so every time that song, and I taught this copyright class for the Nashville community education program. It was a free thing for, older learners that wanted to learn stuff in the evening. And I would go over there and teach this class. And the way I made the point was I'd say, every one of those sound recordings sounds different, and it's by a different artist, but it's all the underlying composition is always My Favorite Things by Rodgers and Hammerstein, regardless of all those sound recordings had different copyright.
Yeah. So one copyright becomes many copyrights because it's embodied in all those recordings. And here's another interesting note. I know we're all over the place. I think this is this is a fascinating conversation for me. I hope that it holds water from as a listener's perspective. You can, if you're a songwriter, when you write a song, you can refuse. Let's say you write a song for your wife. You can refuse anyone to record it. It never has to go out and see the world. Once you sign what's called a first use license and it becomes publicly available, and let's say the Beatles record A Day in the Life, and once they put it out commercially, it's a compulsory license. Everybody and their mother can go. The Apple Records or whoever owns Sony, who owns that publishing, has to issue a license if you want to re-record every Beatles song ever recorded. They cannot refuse. They can only refuse a license if it's what I'm assuming, what I know to be is a first use, meaning you have to grant a first use of that song into the universe. And what I assume would be a derivative. They don't have to authorize a derivative first use, right? Like if you change the lyric.
Right.
So that's important to know as a creator. It opens up a lot of worlds. Like, hey, I could go do a cover of metal songs of all the Bee Gees records, and put out a record. No one's stopping you.
And that's how Spotify thought that they were getting by paying the songwriters, which led to the Music Modernization Act. What Spotify tried to do was get compulsory licenses for everything through Harry Fox. Well, that just got way too big because they got their licenses with the major labels first. And so you probably heard, then they just started storing this money for the composers because they couldn't figure them all out, and they were like, well, we should be okay. We're going to just put it out there. We're going to keep the money over here in case the songwriters pop up, we'll pay them. Well, no, right. Copyright Act doesn't work like that. That's infringement. You have now infringed by releasing something and not paying
But nobody cares, Karl. Nobody cares.
I don't know if you saw this, but under the Music Modernization Act, they started the Copyright Collective, right? To get the mechanical, to match up songwriters and everything. Well, who pays for that Copyright Collective? Spotify and all the services that didn't pay the songwriters in return for immunity from being sued for that copyright infringement. They said, we will fund this new royalty tribunal board that's now here in Nashville. We will fund that if you'll give us immunity from being sued for infringement. And they opened up that black box, and I forgot the number, but they just recently turned over millions of dollars to the collective.
Was it 462 million or something crazy like that?
Right. Yeah. Something like that. That's just been sitting there.
All right. So let's circle back around to this. When you're trying to make a record with someone, it's important from an artist standpoint to make sure that you guarantee that you actually own the work that you're going to exploit, that you're going to put out there. So you need to have work for hire relationships. They're real easy to find on the internet. They're one page. You don't need like a lawyer to look at a work for hire. It's real, not a lot of legalese.
That you are. I'm not saying that you are. I'm not offering that advice. You are.
Well, let me consult with my lawyer. Let's sidebar here. Okay, so I didn't just say that. I don't recommend that. But you need to have a work for hire relationship. You need to figure out how to make sure that you own what you actually own. The question really is like, how do you you just bring papers to the session and have everybody sign them? I guess, right at the end of the workday. Yeah,
and
that's a buzzkill. Like,
yeah, I don't want to, I don't want to give like plugs out for people or anything, but Larry Beard, right? And he's had a studio where he's cranked out demos for years and years and years. And he's got that system down to a science where, everybody comes in, Troy Lancaster, all the guys he always uses, they all come in, and before all the sessions, before the day starts, 10 to 12 and 1 to
10, yeah,
whatever.
10 to 1.
Yeah, 10 to 1. And before that day starts, they all sign, all the
work for hires,
union forms and the work for hires and everything like that. So that then Larry has everything. And so then when he deals with the songwriters who come in for the demos, then the songwriters, when they're paying Larry, they're also getting the value of his services covering all that. Now, he's probably gotten better about this, but one thing that I noticed back, probably 10, 15 years ago is when people would leave, they wouldn't understand that, if I decide to do something more, I might have to upgrade to union. The union scale needs to be upgraded. As long as I'm using it as a demo and kind of pitching the song, it's this cost.
Right.
But if I all of a sudden turn it into a master recording and release it, I need to go back and pay Larry the increased scale.
That's interesting.
So that those musicians get more money.
You own it for a purpose. And if you say, I don't want to repurpose it and it's not going to be in this movie, you don't have the right to do that.
Only people in Nashville really understand the studio musician dynamic of, okay, I'm playing this for you right now, but that's because you're only paying $600 right now, but that's because you're going to pitch the song for somebody else to cut. If you cut it yourself, you got to come back in and there's a master scale list, and you can look at this and decide if you're going to release this many copies, you got to pay this much, and you can go through Harry Fox sometimes for that.
So as an artist, depending on what outlet you have, let's say you're making an independent CD, you get them to sign work for hire under the agreed amount to exchange for their services. Now, turn the mirror side of that, as the creator or as the engineer producer, you have to make sure that you're willing to work that day for just that day, and that you don't want a back end, because then you have to say back to them like, okay, yeah, I'll have a fee and you'll pay me $500 to work for today or $300 to work for today. But
producer fee.
I want to make sure that I have a back end in case this thing goes out and becomes the next Pharrell Happy. I want to make sure that I get these percentages that are part of the spread. I want to be rewarded. So that's your responsibility, right? So we've talked about controlled compositions, which is, them asking you to work for a lesser rate. And there are versions of controlled compositions where you get paid less. You take the 3/4 rate where they say, hey, you're going to be recording a song that you wrote as you're the producer. You wrote a song, the artist is cutting it. We want you to now accept 3/4 royalty rate on the copyright for that song. There's a version of that where you lose tens, if not hundreds, if not millions of dollars because you were the producer, right? So it's like, it may not be in your best interest to cut your own songs in some of those situations, or to not be the producer. Say, I'm not going to produce that track because if it goes on to be happy, I would have made millions more than what I negotiated as my producer rate. So these are all things you need to just consider with the logistics of how you're going to operate and how you're going to make sure that the goal is that you want to keep your client happy. You want everybody to know, hey, I want to make art with you. Here's these papers. I hate doing that. And I don't do a ton of it, but when I need to, I do. I did call you about a Coca-Cola thing. Me and Jimmy Wayne did. That was a national ad campaign, and you helped me through with that. But these are things that are like, you have to make sure that people understand that if this goes as well as all of us are praying that it goes, that we have to be able to talk to each other and go out to dinner with each other. So let's make an agreement so we know what we're doing.
Friends. Yeah,
while we're still friends. Let's not just speculate that it will do well. Let's imagine it did well. And the $1 million that came in from it, are you okay with me walking with $300,000 of that $1 million? Or are you going to hate me for it?
Oh, just for those sounds.
Oh, I didn't hear. But are you going to hate me for it? You have to think that way, because in the end, you want to make more records with these people. You want to make more art. So control composition, we talked about. We talked about work for hire. We talked about some royalty rates. What's another major one? Most favored nations would be that if you're on a compilation record, you don't get paid any less than anyone else, right? We're actually not hearing that, Karl.
Oh, you're not? Oh, okay, good.
Maybe it's just because I'm talking, but the control or the most favored nations means that if you went on to make a record, you're going to get the prevailing highest rate. Can you speak to that real quickly?
Yeah, and most favored nations usually comes to play when in things like distribution deals or basically what it means is I'm going to sign this agreement for this rate. And if you, the other side of this agreement, I say distribution because there's a distributor and then there are a whole bunch of distributed labels. So one label will sign with the distributor and say, okay, we're going to agree to this distribution fee that you're charging for our product to be distributed. But if you sign another label and you give them a better distribution rate or fee, we get the benefit of that same fee. That's the most favored nation. We are a most favored nation. Whatever you do cannot favor someone else over us. We have to be the most favored.
That's a great way to say that. I never understood that language until right then. And I see it from compilation records where I was producing a song on a compilation record and there was a myriad of producers. In my rate, my 3 points in the back end, if someone else got 4, mine would immediately become 4. So you're not going to be treated any less valuable than anyone else on the record. That's the most favored nation clause, right?
Right. Perfect. Yeah. And on the back end stuff, what usually happens in the producer agreement is the producer, and this is if I'm representing the artist or the producer signs the work for hire for the sound recording. Artist walks away owning the sound recording, but has the obligation to pay the producer the points, the percentage points for producing after recoupment of the recording budget. I try not to let them recoup the producer fee, but some bigger artists insist on being able to recoup both, which means get the money back before I pay the producer any back end points. The difference between the producer and the artist, though, is the artist only gets paid going forward after they've recouped if they're on a label. The producer can negotiate to be paid retroactive to record one. And I'm sure y'all have heard that, okay, what I do for the producers, I say, okay, you can recoup the recording budget, what you paid the musicians, what you paid for the studio time, all that stuff. You can't recoup the producer fee. You're paying that fee for that producer's services. You don't get to recoup that. You only recoup the recording budget. You recoup it, and this gets down in the weeds, but they recoup at the artist rate, all-in rate minus the producer portion of the all-in rate. So it takes forever, right? So
recoupment, for those who don't know, recoupment is paying back. It's to
paying whoever back paid for everything. Whoever paid for everything.
You're lucky enough to hire superstar producer Mike Shimshack to produce your record, and it's going to be, you're going to pay Mike Shimshack because he's awesome. You're going to pay him $100,000, right, to make this record. You're going to he's getting $10,000 aside. So 10 songs add up to $100,000. So Mike gets $100,000 in the mail, right? Now, Mike, when his royalties come to kick in, most deals that I've been a part of, because maybe I'm not a superstar, mean that I have to pay down my $100,000 that I've already been given. I don't start making money until the $100,000 is then I start to pick up those 3 points. And I have to pay it back at my royalty rate. So if they sell $1 million worth of records, it doesn't pay down my $100,000 worth of debt. I got to pay it down by the amount they've given me. So if Mike has 3 points on the record, it means he gets 3 pennies every time a record sells, we'll say. Is that math correct? 3 cents a record?
Yeah.
So they sell a million records. If it's 30 grand, is that 30 grand?
If it's a $10, yeah.
So that's 30 grand. They sell a million records. Mike now was paid 100 grand. Mike still is in debt $70,000. He has not recouped his initial investment. Initial advance.
The producer, though, has a certain advantage over the artist because the artist also has to recoup, but the artist does not get, after recoupment, to go back to the very first record and get their artist royalty coming forward from record one. They only get it going out into the future. So producers have a little bit of an advantage there because once and usually what happens is the recoupment happens at the artist all-in rate minus the producer portion of it. So if it's 16 and the producer has 4, it recoups at 12%. So once it recoups, the artist can start collecting going forward. Producer gets everything going back so gets a big fat, hopefully, payment for everything that's already sold.
Yeah, but it doesn't get released.
Where the artist doesn't get that.
Right. Got it. So yeah, this is why you hear about artists who, and I remember who there, Mike, there was I'm trying to remember his name. Oh man, he was a lawyer in New York up on 53rd. He was like a rock lawyer. Pete, not
rock lawyer.
Oh man, I wish I could remember his name. But he wrote this really great article about what does a drummer in a band make with a million selling record. And it was just, when you looked at it, it was one of those situations where you wanted to open your double hung window and jump out. You know, it was like you're another day older and deeper in debt. You know, it was because to get to 1 million in sales, you had, at that point, you had to make some videos that cost 300 grand with a director and a film crew and had radio promotion. And you had accrued so much debt in the recording budget for the record, in the posters and in the you know, all this stuff. When you had finally sold the millionth CD, you were actually in debt because of what it took to get there. And the fact that you were only paying it back. Back in the day, bands were getting about 13% on a record. So $1.30 out of the $10 charge. And they were paying down their $1 million worth of debt $1.30 at a time.
Right. And that's why I always used to tell people back in the day, because I'm old enough to have done this work back in the day. I tell them, make sure you're happy with that advance, because it's going to have to last you probably the rest of your life, unless you do become, you know,
and I think that's why people started to lean more towards like, all right, let's cast that away. We're not going to make money off our record deal unless we're Aerosmith and we have like this longevity. We are going to make money on the road and by selling T-shirts. We're not in the music business. We're in the T-shirt business, because God knows you could sell a T-shirt for $25 if you're a loser artist with a record that somewhat has some resonance. You know, you can find a little crowd to come out. Yeah. You get 150 of your friends to come out every show, or 200 if you're lucky, and you can sell some merch. And for 25, they'll buy it for 25. They'll buy a Keith Urban T-shirt for probably 40, and the Rolling Stones will probably pay 100. You know?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So that's what they started to do that. And this transitions into our next thing that I want to talk about. They started doing that. And then the labels, there's 4 streams of revenue in the music business. Tell us what they are, Karl. So you have royalties, you have mechanicals, you have publishing, you have merch, and you have touring. Those are the 4 that we are always talking about.
I see what you're saying.
4 streams of revenue, 4 ways to make money in the music business.
Right.
So once the mechanicals, which is the record company, right? That's just one of 4. So you had your publishing deal, you had your touring revenues, and you had your merch. So when the record companies went down the toilet, they started to look here, in here, in here, and they started signing people into 360 deals. 360. So when we're talking about producer contracts, we're not talking about production deals, right? So I could be a producer. Me and Mike can find an artist and we can develop them and we can sign them to a production deal where we now participate in 4 streams of royalty, a 360 deal, so that whenever that band eventually gets signed to a record label, we now have participation in all those mechanicals, publishing, touring, and merchandise. So we're not just working off record sales. And bands, because of the changing streams and the need for people to make money in a world that wasn't making money, they started to expand that. And now there's less and less for the artist to sort of walk away with. But as a producer, when I sign a production deal, I just decide what I'm going to make for the record and what maybe my back end is. When me and Mike get together or just me call myself a production company and sign somebody to me, I become the record label and I start to control other things if they allow me to.
Artist development.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about production deals. I think they're kind of out of favor now, right? Because labels won't let you do it as a producer, because they need to do it.
Right. I mean, and then the opposite can be true too. The labels have turned into the data analysts have become more important at the record labels now, it seems like, than the A&R department, because before they sign anybody, they're doing all the data analytics on, okay, how many followers, how many, are they monetizing YouTube? Are they monetizing this, that? Have they got the streams on Spotify? If you don't have so really the record labels, in my experience now, are sometimes relying on some producers and publishers to do the artist development because they just don't want to do it. They're not even going to sign anybody until they've reached a certain level of achievement. The days of Chris Christopherson mowing the lawn over there at Sony, to get the attention of somebody are gone. You have to have the data to provide. You have to give them Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, all your numbers. But what you're doing, I think, has a huge amount of value, especially some of the bands I've seen you develop. What you're doing is you're taking them to this level that will get that attention from the label. And I think that's where the value comes in, because you understand what it means to be a hit songwriter, what it means to be a hit producer. You understand all the things that go into it. So you can offer that sage advice plus your name on as producer to the new up and coming artists, and you become the A&R department basically for the record label through your production deal.
They have done that, yeah.
Now the ones that it happens more in hip hop, the ones you're talking about in hip hop, where the producer basically owns the artist, and the producer is basically attached at the hip to the artist. And then the record
like Lou Pearlman, right?
Yeah, that's a great example. Wow, that's a whole nother.
He essentially owned those guys,
right, and did other things. No, the producer in those situations can keep control of the artist up until a certain point, and then say, okay, I'll let you go to the label, and the label can use their own producer if they want to redo these tracks, but I get what's called an override royalty. So that if they use my tracks on you when you sign, I get my 4%. But if they choose their own producer and say, we want to cut these ourselves with our own producer, I still get 2% because it was my tracks or my production that got you the attention of the record label.
Yeah. You're getting paid not to work.
So the override, the override, yeah. So I wanted to make sure we got the override royalty out there too.
Override royalty. Yeah. I mean, there's so much to think about. It's like production deals. And I feel compelled, me and Mike both feel compelled to, like, all that stuff you said, there might be small variants of it that are true. But I feel compelled to tell artists when I work with them that I can't get them a record deal, that my name and my cachet isn't such that people are and I don't know that anybody out there, maybe David Foster walks in and says, sign this guy. That isn't going to happen with me. I'm not going to. I can make your songs better. I think I could take you to the next level where I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. But I question, in the model that you're talking about where analytics rule the world, I question if that even matters. Because remember that girl who sang the Friday song?
Yeah.
Like,
I
don't know if that girl had a record deal. It ended up making money, but she's more probable to have a record deal than something that breaks my heart that I love, because the analytics, the numbers are moving for that. So, yeah, I mean, I feel compelled to always tell people like, hey, what you're paying for me is the work, is my opinion, is what I deliver to you at the end of the project. And I will do my best to tell people that I'm excited about it, because I will be excited about it, because I don't do things unless I'm excited about them. But that only matters as much as I can compel people until they can see my excitement for it. I can't get you a record deal. I'm not going to, there is no magic shortcut, and you may find that some bozo that makes a joke video gets a record deal and $1 million advance. And like the Beatles shopped their record to multiple labels that turned them down. We don't get to control this stuff. This is not within our control. So,
although I do still have a certain amount of faith in, quality and artistic integrity. I still do have I still have a personal belief that still can rise above. And I tell artists, if you're interested in getting your record produced, don't just look for the name, but also listen to records produced by different people and see what sound you like. That's the most important thing. You want to get the producer that brings you out, and that's one of the things that I know from you, Joe, Mike. I got to get more up to speed and start I got to look at your All Music Guide and get some of your produced stuff so I can get a feel for your production chops. But I do know Joe's, and I know that, that is invaluable. That stamp almost, or that sound, or the way you can pull somebody out is the most important thing in the music business, regardless of, and it's the same thing with booking agencies. They could care less if you're a juggler or if you're a great music artist. If you sell tickets, that's all they care about. I still believe, though, that touring as an artist is still super important. And, you brought up the Series LLC, and that's where you can control all of those. You can put those streams of revenue in the different silos in a Series LLC and only pay one annual fee for the head LLC. Keep separate accountings, have your publishing silo, Series LLC A, have your touring silo, Series LLC B, have your merchandise silo, Series LLC C, and have your sound recording ownership, because you got all this work for hire signed, and you put your sound recordings in your silo D, and you can go on like that.
And the great thing about that is, if someone participates and can change your world in the merch world, they only participate in the merch LLC. Right. They're not getting stuff out of your performance royalties, or your publishing or merch.
Exactly. And if you get sued for copyright infringement, it only infects your publishing silo, and the liability doesn't spread to.
Oh, that's genius.
Your touring and your merch and everything else. So all they can get is what's in your publishing.
Wow. Amazing. Hey, we want to make a note that we're working. You'll notice Mike's talking into an SM7 today.
Woohoo!
We're working on, we've got a ground thing that in his Zoom thing, we're going to get his mic rocking. We should shoot a whole audio engineering section on us fixing Mike's podcast microphone thing. Sounds like he's trying to contact us like over MySpace from like Jupiter, but sorry about that, Mikey. We'll get you going and get you rocking.
We're pros. We can figure it out.
Well,
the bumper music is awesome, though. I love that.
Oh, yeah, that's Mikey.
The way you did that.
Yeah, Mike, we'll end up. So this is a little behind the scenes here. So Mike plays that over the phone into the speaker, which actually works really good because it's super bright and it's from the phone. So it's kind of have a Joe Walsh thing, and it really stands out. If you listen to the original recording, it ends up being a little bit less, energetic. So it's a cool vibe. It's a cool thing that he does it. But what we do is I have one version in post. As soon as I say, "Hey, it's Joe West. Welcome to the West Barn," Mike turns it off, and people think, "Oh, that's weird." But all that is a placeholder. And then I have another version that he did on a cell phone that I fly it in post. So it ends up working out. But
you producers,
it's so lo-fi that it's hi-fi. I love just sort of the philosophy behind it. Yeah. But we're going to get Mike's thing working up. I want to thank you for coming on.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think you could be a recurring guest.
And maybe, and just have one subject.
Have somebody send us in something and say, hey, what do I do in this situation?
Focus on one thing. Yeah.
Dude, that's brilliant. If people want to, we've got a little widget on our website. You can go and leave us a voice message, or you can email us. Go to fromthewestbarn.com and just go to the contact page there and send it. It will come to me. And my email address, I'll just tell you, is gasolineinc@gmail.com. It's my only email address. It's not one specifically for this. Gasoline Inc., INC, like incorporated. Gasolineinc@gmail. Email us your legal questions, and maybe we'll bring Karl Braun on for segments that we put in. It'd be a really cool thing. I love having these conversations. To me, this is super fascinating.
I love it too.
May not be fascinating on a listen back. It might just be so scattered. I'm not sure, but I love talking to you.
I love talking to you too. Like I said, you stay on top of all this stuff. So, it's always a great time.
Here's don't let the legal stuff, and Karl, I'm sure you agree with this. You correct me if I'm wrong. Don't let the legal stuff get in the way of the creative stuff. Be able to make sure that you can treat someone like you'd want to be treated. Every piece of paper that I've signed is only as good as the morality of the person that signs it. Because at the end of the day, if they violate it and you get a judgment against them, you still have to go collect it. The blood out of a stone sort of thing. The reality is make a deal that you question. Every time you go to re-sign it, I question whether I should re-sign it. That's how equitable it is. Give your opposition the ability to make money, and you make enough money and agree on that money so that you can go on and make record 2, record 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, be a legacy with them. It's not a smash and grab, do the first Britney Spears record and then hate her and have her hate you for the next 25 years. The goal is be fair with people, be fair to yourself, make sure you get what you want to get, and don't do smash and grabs, and make sure you can look yourself in the face and treat people with the respect you want to be treated, and then commemorate that on paper.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
The greatest joy, I think, is being able to have paper with people, contracts, and be able to work with them for decades, to be able to continue doing it. That shows that people feel like they're getting what you said you were going to give them. So
everybody appreciates and values each other.
Karl is one of the best guys in town, and he loves it. I get the sense, I know this isn't true, I get the sense that he'll litigate giant liability cases, medical liability cases. I think once you were doing a capital murder thing, is that possible? There was something about a security guard.
It wasn't the criminal side, it was the civil side. It's just like OJ, on the criminal side, the jury found him innocent, but on the civil side, where the preponderance of the evidence is a lesser standard than beyond a reasonable doubt, the family can sue for wrongful death. Wrongful death is the civil equivalent of murder on the criminal side, or manslaughter, or whatever the other.
Well, Karl is the guy that whenever you hire a lawyer, they hire Karl to go into court and actually stand there and make the argument. So he's a spectacular dude that wakes up at 3:00 in the morning and does 10 billion push-ups a year, and still he loves the music so much that I doubt that the music part of it's almost like, I bet you they let you do music because they don't want to lose you.
It's called passion projects. A lot of them are passion projects, but I mean,
where are you going to find a lawyer that does that for you is my point. It's like you are emotionally invested in the well-being of your music clients.
The fringe benefit of that is getting all the music that may never see the light of day, because I get to hear the work tapes. And
thank you for being that. And it's the only reason I won't use another lawyer when I need a lawyer. I call Karl because he's brilliant.
I still have the Do You Believe Me Now, Joe West version, the original, very first version.
Oh, wow.
I still listen to that because I actually love that
with me and Dave Behanish.
Yeah, more than I like the Jimmy. I mean, I love the Jimmy Wayne version, and Jimmy Wayne does a great live. His radio tour when he was playing it, I was like, wow, that dude is good. But I love that first version y'all did.
Oh, thank you, dude. A lot of that version ended up in the final version.
It did
since I produced both. But if you are a musician, if you are an artist, if you are getting a publishing deal, a record deal, hiring a producer, hiring a band, if you need any consultation in music, I will say that you cannot do better in my eyes than Karl Braun. So we're going to put his contact information below. I don't know what time he has to be able to take on new clients, but you'll be lucky if he were to bring you into his fold. He's got your best interest in mind. I'm very appreciative for you, man.
Thank you very much, Joe. Coming from you, I really appreciate that.
Well, Nashville's lucky to have you. That's it for this week. We'd like to continue doing this. So if you've got anything that you want us to ask Karl Braun, send it to us via email, gasolineinc@gmail.com with a C. And we will start to maybe shoot little segments because I think it's fascinating. I love talking about this stuff.
Cool. It's great.
All right, y'all.
Thank you, Karl.
Thank you, Karl. That's it. Signing off this week.
In beast mode tomorrow.
What'd you say?
Let's all wake up in beast mode tomorrow.
Yeah, you've got to. Is that on Instagram that you're doing those videos? Where do you do those? Because I see them on Facebook, maybe Facebook Live.
No, I just do them on Instagram, but then they go to Tumblr and Twitter.
Okay, you've got to see it because this is not the dude that you're seeing right here. There is an insane person at 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning. It's the equivalent of those old Hot Rod T-shirts where they had like the muscled out car and there was like this monster sticking out of the top with a gear shifter with an 8-ball on it. You know?
Yeah, I used to have those cards, those trading cards.
Yeah, that is you at 3 o'clock in the morning. You're completely out of your mind. He becomes more and more sane as the day goes on.
That's what I'm going for.
And I'm like, that's my lawyer is what I put under. That dude's my lawyer. So, all right. Thank you so much. We're signing off this week from the West Farm. We'll see you next time.